For years, Richard Carpenter carried a silence heavier than any melody he ever composed. The world adored the music he created with his younger sister Karen, but few knew the storm brewing behind their polished harmonies. Karen Carpenter had a voice that could move millions, yet her life unraveled in ways that left her family shattered. Richard watched it all from the closest seat possible, her brother, her partner, and eventually, her survivor. Now, looking back, he has revealed truths that once stayed locked behind closed doors. Truths that reshape how we understand the Carpenter's story and the devastating end that followed. Childhood shadows and family divide. Karen Carpenter was born on March 2, 1950, in New Haven, Connecticut, at Grace New Haven Hospital. Her older brother Richard, born in 1946, had already been labeled the prodigy of the family. Richard showed perfect pitch by the time he was 4 and was composing music at 5. Their mother, Agnes, celebrated every detail of Richard's progress, documenting his lessons and praising his talent to anyone who would listen. When it came to Karen, the attention was far different. She was often described as the child who just banged pots and pans in the kitchen. That imbalance became the foundation of Karen's lifelong struggle for approval, especially from her mother. Their father, Harold, worked in printing, earning modest wages that barely covered the family's needs. By 1963, he was earning about $7,200 a year, and when an opportunity arose in California, the Carpenters sold their small Connecticut home for $12,500 and bought a house in Downey for $13,500. The real motivation behind the move was Richard. Agnes believed Los Angeles would give her son the chance to fulfill his destiny in music. In letters to relatives, she wrote about Richard's bright future but barely mentioned Karen at all. Karen, only 13 when the family relocated, struggled to adjust. She spoke with an East Coast accent that set her apart at Downey High School. She was shy, awkward, and often felt like she didn't belong. But then came the turning point. During a music class, she tried the glockenspiel, but when the drummer of the school band quit, Karen asked to step in. Within minutes, the conductor realized she had a natural gift for rhythm. She mastered patterns in weeks that took others months. By the end of that year, she was already playing complex pieces like Caravan and Malagueña. Despite her obvious talent, her mother remained unmoved. Richard was given a $750 Baldwin piano and private lessons. Karen practiced on borrowed drums, never receiving financial support for her music. In her high school diary, she wrote the heartbreaking line, "Mom thinks Richard is Mozart, and I'm just noise." Richard, however, saw something very different. He recognized her rhythm as extraordinary, and in time, her voice would prove even more remarkable. The rise of the Carpenters. In 1965, Richard Carpenter, 19, was arranging jazz while his 15-year-old sister Karen impressed behind the drums. With bassist Wes Jacobs, they formed the Richard Carpenter Trio and won the 1966 Hollywood Bowl Battle of the Bands with Richard's piece Ice-T. RCA gave them studio time, but their jazz sound clashed with the rock era, and the group fell apart. Everything changed when Karen casually sang "I'll Be Seeing You." Richard realized her voice was extraordinary, even if she still thought of herself as a drummer who happens to sing. By 1967, they formed Spectrum, focusing on harmonies, though record labels dismissed them as too soft. Still, Richard built arrangements around Karen's contralto, convinced it was their path forward. In 1969, a demo of their slowed, emotional version of Ticket to Ride reached Herb Alpert at A&M Records. Captivated, he signed them on April 22nd. Karen, only 19, needed her parents to co-sign the contract. Their debut album, Offering, later Ticket to Ride, wasn't a major hit, but showcased Karen's drumming, vocals, and even bass playing. The world was beginning to hear the voice that would soon define a generation. worldwide fame, and the pressure of perfection. The turning point came on July 25, 1970, when the Carpenters released They Long to Be Close to You. Within weeks, it soared to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, staying there for 4 consecutive weeks. The siblings, once struggling to find a label, were suddenly household names. The album Close to You followed, reaching #2 in the United States and #1 in Canada. Karen was just 20 years old, and her voice was now one of the most recognizable in America. Only months later, they released We've Only Just Begun, a song originally written for a bank commercial by Paul Williams and Roger Nichols. Richard heard potential and persuaded Williams to expand it. Released in August 1970, the song reached #2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and spent 7 weeks at #1 on the Adult Contemporary chart. Couples across America began using it as their wedding song, and its hopeful lyrics became a cultural anthem. In just 1 year, the Carpenters had achieved what most musicians could only dream of: multiple hit singles, sold-out concerts, and Grammy Awards, including Best New Artist in 1971. Yet behind the success, the cracks were already forming. Karen was naturally shy and preferred the security of her drum kit. On stage, hidden behind her Ludwig set, she felt safe. But audiences wanted to see her face. Critics complained there was no focal point during concerts, and management pushed her to step out from behind the drums. By 1972, her appearances at the kit were limited to short showcases, while most of the show required her to stand at the microphone, exposed and anxious. She admitted in interviews, "I consider myself a drummer who sings," but even that identity was being taken from her. The fame also intensified family tensions. Though Karen's voice had become the centerpiece of their success, her mother, Agnes, continued to favor Richard. She publicly praised his genius as arranger and composer while brushing aside Karen's achievements. Richard's perfectionism also weighed heavily. He chose the songs, crafted every arrangement, and enforced a relentless schedule. In 1973 alone, the Carpenters played 174 concerts, recorded a full album, and appeared on multiple television specials. Karen, exhausted, felt powerless, reduced to the image of the sweet-voiced frontwoman rather than a full artist. The illness deepens, and the solo dream. By the mid-1970s, Karen's health had become impossible to ignore. At live performances, her frail appearance often drew audible gasps from the audience. In 1975, the Carpenters abruptly canceled their European tour. Officially, the reason was exhaustion, but those close to the group knew the truth. Karen was too weak to perform. At just 91 pounds, she could barely stand through a set. Newspapers speculated about cancer or other illnesses, but almost no one recognized the signs of anorexia nervosa. It was a disorder that remained virtually unspoken, hidden behind shame and misunderstanding. Still, the praise for her talent never stopped. In 1975, Playboy magazine held its annual music poll, and to everyone's surprise, Karen was voted the 10th best drummer in the world, ranking even higher than John Bonham of Led Zeppelin. Bonham, reportedly furious at the comparison, mocked the result. But for female musicians, it was a landmark moment. A woman who had been pushed away from her drums was still recognized among the best in a male-dominated field. Karen herself downplayed it, joking, "I hope he's not too upset. I love Led Zeppelin." Yet privately, the poll only reminded her of what she had lost, the freedom to play the instrument she loved most. Behind closed doors, the family dynamic only deepened her pain. When she finally sought professional help in the early 1980s, therapist Stephen Levenkron invited her parents to join a session. Richard was able to tell Karen he loved her. But when it came to Agnes, the approval Karen had craved her whole life, her mother could not say the words. Not even in therapy, not even when her daughter was clearly dying. Richard later admitted that moment haunted him because he saw how much Karen needed to hear it. Amid the personal struggles, Karen longed for independence. In 1979, with Richard in rehab for his addiction to Quaaludes, she seized the opportunity to pursue a solo album. She traveled to New York and began recording with producer Phil Ramone, known for his work with Paul Simon and Billy Joel. The sessions were electric. Karen experimented with disco, ballads, and jazz-infused tracks. She sang sultry lyrics that showed a more mature side of her artistry. Paul Simon was so impressed with her rendition of "Still Crazy After All These Years" that he altered a lyric for her version. For the first time, Karen was shaping her own music without Richard's control. Friends who heard the finished album were stunned. They said it was the most confident, versatile work she had ever done. Karen herself was overjoyed. She even considered moving to New York to start fresh, away from the suffocating family dynamics in Downey. But when she played the album for Richard and executives at A&M Records in early 1980, the reaction devastated her. Richard, just out of rehab, saw the project as a betrayal. Herb Alpert called the album unreleasable. Despite praise from industry insiders, the label shelved it. Karen was charged $400,000 to cover the recording costs, deducted from future Carpenter's royalties. A marriage of lies and the final spiral. Just as her solo dream was collapsing, Karen believed she had finally found love. In June 1980, she met Thomas James Burris, a real estate developer 9 years older than her. Charming and polished, he seemed to be the stability she longed for. Within 2 months, they were engaged, shocking even her closest friends. Karen had always dreamed of marriage and children, and she convinced herself that Burris could give her the life she craved outside the stage lights. The wedding was set for August 31st, 1980, at the Beverly Hills Hotel. On the surface, it was a fairy tale. But days before the ceremony, Karen discovered a devastating truth. Burris had undergone a vasectomy years earlier and had no intention of reversing it. For Karen, who desperately wanted children, the news was crushing. She turned to her mother for support, but Agnes was unmoved. The invitations had been sent, the hotel was booked, and the family reputation was at stake. "You made your bed. Lie in it," she reportedly told her daughter. With no one to stand beside her, Karen walked down the aisle with a broken heart. The marriage quickly deteriorated. Burris was not wealthy as he had presented himself. In fact, he was drowning in debt. He began borrowing enormous sums from Karen, $35,000 here, $50,000 there, draining the fortune she had built from years of tours and recordings. At dinners, she often arrived in dark sunglasses, hiding tears. Friends recalled her breaking down in public, terrified to go home. Burris mocked her frail body, calling her a bag of bones, and insisting no one would ever love her. The abuse deepened her illness. By 1981, Karen's health was spiraling. She was consuming as many as 90 laxatives a day, along with thyroid medication under a false name to boost her metabolism. Her weight dropped to a shocking 77 pounds. She confided in her brother that she needed help, and eventually sought treatment with psychotherapist Stephen Levenkron in New York. There, she tried to confront her eating disorder head-on. At one point, Levenkron confiscated the medications she had been abusing. But progress was slow. Karen was under enormous pressure to recover quickly, to keep performing, to keep producing. She longed for a quick fix, yet no such solution existed. In September 1982, Karen was admitted to Lenox Hill Hospital in New York. Doctors placed her on intravenous nutrition. She gained 30 pounds in a matter of weeks, but the sudden change put dangerous strain on her weakened heart. The final days and Richard's painful silence. In the final weeks of her life, Karen Carpenter appeared to be turning a corner. On December 17, 1982, she sang Christmas carols for her godchildren and their classmates at the Buckley School in Sherman Oaks. It would be her last performance. On January 11, 1983, She attended a celebration for the 25th anniversary of the Grammy Awards. Friends like Dionne Warwick noticed that, though still frail, Karen was unusually vibrant that night. She smiled, laughed, and even joked, "Look at me! I've got an ass." It seemed like a glimmer of hope. On February 1st, Karen visited Richard. They spoke about future plans for the Carpenters, even touring again. But 3 days later, the fragile balance collapsed. On the morning of February 4th, 1983, Karen was preparing to sign divorce papers. At her parents' home in Downey, she collapsed in a walk-in closet. Paramedics arrived to find her heart beating just 6 times a minute. She was rushed to Downey Community Hospital but pronounced dead at 9:51 a.m. She was only 32. Her funeral, held on February 8th at Downey United Methodist Church, drew nearly 1,000 mourners, including Olivia Newton-John, Petula Clark, and Dionne Warwick. Her estranged husband, Thomas Burris, placed his wedding ring into her casket. Karen was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cypress, California, and later reinterred alongside her parents in Westlake Village. The autopsy revealed the truth. She had died of heart failure caused by emetine cardiotoxicity, the result of years of anorexia and ipecac abuse. For Richard, the loss was devastating. He had been at her side from the first rehearsal to the last conversation. In interviews years later, he admitted he had seen the warning signs but hadn't known how to stop them. He spoke about the therapy session when he told Karen he loved her, while their mother could not say the same. He recalled the moments when Karen pushed him to seek help for his addiction, even as she refused to acknowledge her own illness. He has said that living without her felt like losing a part of himself. Yet Richard devoted his life to preserving her legacy. He remastered their recordings, released compilations, and in 1996 finally allowed Karen's solo album to be heard by the public. What she once called "our record" with Phil Ramone became a bittersweet glimpse of what could have been. To this day, her voice remains one of the most beloved in music history, warm, haunting, and unforgettable. But for Richard, every note carries both pride and pain. Behind the harmonies was a sister he couldn't save, and the silence he carried for decades was born of grief too deep for words. Karen Carpenter's music still touches millions, but her real story is far more heartbreaking than the world ever knew. Richard has finally shared the truth, not just about her voice, but about her suffering. What's the Carpenters song that means the most to you? Share it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of music's hidden tragedies.